Good evening and welcome to Looking for Solutions. This evening, we take a look at the failed Sandals proposal in Tobago. Last week, the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, took time out to get the media and the wider public up to speed on the project. He began by dispelling some of the allegations leveled at his administration over the initiation of the project idea.
In an article which I have from The Guardian, the opposition leader's statement is here. And the first thing I want to take issue with is where it is said that the project in Tobago failed to garner public support. I want to put that to rest. The opposite is true. The Sandals project, as envisaged and was being pursued by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which I led, had widespread public support in Tobago. And if you ask me how I know that, I live in Tobago as well as in Trinidad. And as Prime Minister, part of my official duties, I did what no other Prime Minister has done in the history of this country on matters like this, which is before a project which in some measure might have some element of differences of opinion, I would call it. I went to Scarborough. I sat down in front of the population in Tobago. Any person in Tobago was free to come there, broadcast live, and the Sandals project was one of the issues that I sat there and discussed with the people of Tobago in front of the national community. And I came away from there convinced, as I was before, that the project had widespread support in Tobago. I've been in touch with a lot of people in Tobago upon whom this project would have impacted, and persons who are anxiously preparing to receive this development in Tobago.
Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, the Prime Minister accepted that some people may be cynical about the motives of public officials.
One of the problems that we are having in Trinidad and Tobago with this government in particular is that we have become so accustomed to being lied to that when the truth is spoken without any frills and without any ulterior motive, the population has difficulty accepting the truth, simply because we have grown up, particularly in recent times, on a diet of lies from official sources. So I understand the cynicism.
Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, in answer to the Prime Minister's conversation with the media, the opposition leader, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, said she was not impressed by the explanation given for the failure of the project.
After more than 3 hours, we are more confused about the purpose of the PM's conversation with the media, and we have no more clarity on why Sanders left and what is the next step. We are no clearer on Tobago development, no clearer on a plan for diversification, no clearer on a growth strategy, no clearer on where we are headed as a country in Trinidad and Tobago.
Opposition leader Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and only this morning the AmCham TNT CEO Nirad Tiwari said that the business community would like to know if money that might have been used for a Sandals hotel project could be better spent on other projects.
We have to look at the models, whether spending billions of dollars in that in that manner at this time with a heavy debt burden already is going to net us the cash flows that will allow us to service that debt and so on. But and also what is the model of development that we want for Tobago and for our tourism sector?
That was Nirad Tiwari, the CEO of AmCham Trinidad and Tobago. Well, the argument has been that there was misinformation that followed the process of revealing the Sandals prospects. Well, this evening, it's my pleasure to welcome Attorney at Law Martin George to discuss the project and the aftermath of the pullout. So, good afternoon or good evening, Mr. George.
Yes, hi, good evening to you and good evening to your listeners and good evening Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, what can we learn from it all and how can we overcome some of those challenges that having such a facility would have uncovered?
Well, the thing is, I think the first lesson we can learn and that we can glean from this entire exercise is actually encapsulated in the very name you have for this program. Because what we should in future be doing in such a negotiation is looking for solutions. And the name of your program says it all, and instead what you found was so many detractors and naysayers who appeared to be looking for problems. You know, and I mean, I have learned a long time ago, and I've told people repeatedly, that if you wish to spend all your time looking for problems, you will never be disappointed. You will always find problems, you know. So the point is, it's your entire approach and mindset, I think, that sets the tone for how you go forward. And certainly, I think the government has to take blame in terms of, you know, the way they managed and handled the process. And I think the Prime Minister eventually admitted to that and said, you know, there are lessons that they too can learn from this entire exercise. But, you know, when you assess the scenario, you really have to ask yourself, what is your end game going into it? You can't plan a negotiation or discussion like this and you take it step by step, you know, without knowing where you ultimately want to be. And the way I have looked at it and the way I have, you know, rationalized it, at the end of the day, it appears to me, respectfully, that this was a scenario where Tobago needed Sandals. Sandals did not need Tobago. And I think Mr. Gordon Butch Stewart, in his exit interview, basically said as much. You know, he said, listen, you know, I don't need this. I could do without the hassle. I could do without the stress. And he says he has no obligation to put anything in Tobago. And you see, when we hear the criticisms and the issues and the problems, I respect those views. And I say, yes, if they're valid issues, then by all means, let's address them. But I will never, ever approach anything in life that because there is a problem means that it's insurmountable or that you could never find a way around it or that you can't, you know, attempt to be looking for solutions. And I think that was one of the big drawbacks in this scenario. And maybe, I mean, it might not have been the only reason for their pullout, but I'm sure the negativity must have had some impact, you know, on the group in terms of their decision. It may not be the only reason, but certainly I can very well understand that one would not feel encouraged to continue in such a scenario, particularly where you recognize from the outset that, look, this is something they need more than me.
Yes, so perhaps we could look a little bit at the history of the proposal, because some have mentioned that it was something that was hatched whilst the current government was in opposition. So perhaps we could actually hear a little bit of the history, and we'll come back to the discussion with Martin George in just a moment. If we'll just hear what Dr. Keith Rowley had to say about the history of the proposal.
Members of the media, the only conversation I had with anybody from Sandals was in a public place once, and that was as opposition leader. I was invited to an annual, I think it was a dinner of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, where the feature speaker at that function at the Hyatt, where I was an invited guest, was Mr. Adam Stewart, a director of Sandals, and Mr. Butch Stewart was in the audience. The substance of that presentation by the Stewarts, who were Mr. Adam Stewart, who was the guest speaker at the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association dinner, where I was a guest, was the role of the Sandals business and its evolution as a Caribbean powerhouse and a world brand in the all-inclusive market, tourism market. I have never spoken to anyone in that organization before, but when it was over, I, having known about Sandals as a Caribbean brand, and being in their presence here in Trinidad and Tobago, and as opposition leader, looking at the future of Trinidad and Tobago, and the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, particularly the people of Tobago, I said to the Stewarts in the presence of other persons of the TTMA that in the event that the PNM wins the elections, I expect we will, because it was just before the elections, we would ask Sandals, in the event that we are the government, in the coming months, we will ask Sandals to visit Tobago, look at Tobago, and see whether there's any place in Tobago where Sandals might be attracted to bring its brand into our country, in Tobago. That was the sum total of the conversation I had with the Sandals group in a public place at the Hyatt at that event. As fate would have it, we won the elections, and the Sandals people came on that invitation. We afforded them an entry into Tobago to meet the THA, and they were allowed, as invited, to look around Tobago. I think they spent a day, at least one day in Tobago, touring Tobago, and I think it was by air. They eventually came back from Tobago, having carried out that exercise, and reported that the only place they saw in Tobago which could be suitable for the Sandals model of business, which is a good beach, access to the airport, the water sports, and so on and so on. However they looked at it, they were the ones, after they had a look at the whole of Tobago, including the Magdalena on the beach on the windward side of Tobago, they came back and said, yes, we have found a site which we think can be utilized for this purpose. It's a greenfield site, and of course, we were happy to hear that. Immediately following up on that expression of an interest in that location, the government then said, well, we can put a project together. Right then and there, the Sandals persons made it quite clear to us that their model is largely to go in and take over a hotel that is available, not doing well, or even doing well, and refashion it to their model. And this place in Tobago is a greenfield. There's no hotel there. The place that they thought would be the ideal location, there's no hotel there, so one has to be built. But their model does not include starting from scratch on that scale, as we would anticipate a scale that would bring about the kind of influence that it would have on Tobago and on Trinidad and Tobago.
The voice there of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley speaking last week in his conversation with the media on the topic of the Sandals project, which has failed so far. But the idea of using the said land is not something new, is it, Mr. George?
No, it's not at all, because if you think of what occurred with Occidental Investments Limited, a subsidiary of the CL Financial Group, several years ago, their entire project was based in the very same area, right, in the Golden Grove area. And that project, they went through, they had designs for a golf course, a marina, almost everything that the Sandals group has said, and you never heard any protest, nobody ever made any issue or fuss about it. So while one doesn't want to diminish or at all minimize the complaints and the protests, what you would certainly have to understand is that, look, if it is that there was a difficulty with that location, then there could have been other locations. But, it's instructive listening there to how the Prime Minister explained the way the genesis of this evolved, because it's clear that there was a bit of a top-down approach from the government in this matter. In other words, based on his chance meeting at the TTMA function, and his discussion, he decided, well, look, hey, we will be willing to give you an opportunity. And, upon, as he said, winning the election, he did so. But the point is, you clearly saw the lack of the buy-in from the public in terms of the essential origins of the project. And I think that's where they certainly would have failed. Now, sometimes when you're in government and when you're in leadership, if you know the end result is something that is definitely going to be beneficial, then you just bite the bullet and you go ahead. You really cannot sit and wait around for, every objector to be silenced or to, quell their protest. Still an example of that is what occurred in St. Vincent when the Prime Minister there, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, he decided that, look, St. Vincent needed a new airport. And the place where he had to site that airport, it required the removal of 4 mountains to do so. And the condemning of the old airport. And, I mean, St. Vincentians were up in arms about it, and they but he plowed ahead, and he said it took him 10 years to complete, but he said now he's the darling and hero of the nation because everybody sees the benefit of the new airport. So, sometimes if it is that you have a vision, and the Bible tells us a people without a vision shall surely perish. So if there was that conviction in the minds and hearts of the government that, look, this is something that is good for Tobago, then notwithstanding the naysayers and the doubters, I mean, we know in the Bible about the story about doubting Thomas, and what Jesus said is, look, now that you have seen and touched my wounds, you believe, right? But blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. So, the government needs to have that kind of faith resonating within them if they know they are right. So maybe they themselves, harbored some uncertainty. And I think that is what translated to the population. And, people fed on that, and therefore they mounted their protests and increased their cries against the project, But if you are convicted in your heart and you know that, look, this is something that is ultimately going to be good, then you do your explanations, you do your groundwork, you bring out your statistics, and you make a compelling case to be able to convince the persons, just as Vincentians are now convinced that, look, hey, this really was a good thing.
But sometimes it may be a question of, I believe, but help my unbelief, in that sometimes the project may not necessarily go through in the way that we would like it to go through. Then what? I'm looking at the 21st century now with all the social media that we have. And incidentally, if you want to send in a WhatsApp message, anybody could send it in to 275-1981, 275-1981, short comment or question, and we'll read it on the air. But in this modern day now, everything is instant, and is there room for benevolent dictators?
Well, it's not that you've been a benevolent despot in the scenario, but the point is, as I say, sometimes if you know and you are convinced that there is the ultimate benefit, then the onus is on you to do the convincing, and to really do that groundwork even more than necessary. So in other words, it's not that you will say, well, okay, I know it's good, so I'm going to do it anyhow. No, I know it's good, so I'm going to convince you and let you understand why it's good. That's the point I'm making. And that's where I think certainly they failed, because I think they went ahead with the notion that, well, obviously you must realize this is good for you, so I'm going to go ahead. And that's where they failed. And maybe that's the point that you're making there, that, the effect of social media and, people's interactions, it clearly did not trickle down. Whatever vision the government had did not trickle down to some sectors of the population. And that's where they have to take responsibility.
Yes, but in terms of the nature of this agreement, is it fair to say that the government would have had a difficulty in explaining some of the things because they weren't yet crystallized?
Well, and that, I think, is exactly the point. The fact that they weren't crystallized as yet, it means that there was great uncertainty in terms of exactly how you will work out the mechanics of it. But I'll tell you, sometimes you have scenarios where you may take a short-term loss or a long-term gain. In other words, you may go through 7 years of famine, but you know that at the end of it, you have 7 years of plenty. So therefore, you understand that, look, I have to bite the bullet at this stage. I have to make the sacrifice. I have to tighten my belt. I have to buckle down and take the strain, because I know I will see the promised land. The Israelites wandered in the deserts for 40 years before they got a glimpse of the promised land. So the point is, we sometimes know that, look, it's a difficult journey, and you need to get the population along with you to understand that, hey, listen, there's not going to be any instant, reward. This is not a magic bullet. And that's what I keep saying. I've said it repeatedly. The idea of having a brand like Sandals in Tobago is not going to be the immediate cure and panacea for all the tourism woes and ills. But what you are doing, remember, building a tourism product is a multi-layered process. So what you are doing, you are setting a platform. In other words, you are flipping the script. You are saying, hey, listen, Tobago, let us rewrite your story. We are starting on a platform of excellent service delivery, an internationally recognized brand, one that can pull other airlines, pull other hotels and other chains, and then we build from there. So in other words, I may make no profit whatsoever of this Sandals deal immediately, but I can see the long-term benefits, and that's where I think the government failed woefully in explaining it to the public.
Another thing I suppose would be the question of, which is related to that, is the overall cost. Nobody could say, give us a ballpark figure as to what it would cost for people to make those kind of assessments.
Right, and that's the thing. So, in other words, it appears that they were going into it without having those specifics locked down, without having a clear idea of it. So in that case, the onus is even greater on the government to explain to the public that, look, hey, this is something we haven't fleshed out yet in terms of the numbers. We haven't drilled down into the details, but bear with us. We are looking at these two options, or these are the possibilities, or this is the range of possibilities. And then you show the public that, look, sometimes, okay, like for instance, remember, okay, let's use the oil companies as an example. They come into a jurisdiction, they make their investment, and they know that, look, maybe for the first 10, 15 years, they may just be breaking even. And they go in full well knowing that. But they know that for the next 25 or 30 years, they're reaping so much profit that it takes care of all of that. So that now requires an explanation for the man in the street, because the ordinary citizen in Trinidad and Tobago will say, but you're going into this to make a loss. It doesn't make sense. Or just to break even, that doesn't make sense. But you now need to do that work and show them the ultimate benefits that could be derived. And that is where I think the government failed miserably.
All right, we're speaking with Martin George, attorney at law, and we'll be returning in just a moment. We're talking about the Sandals project and also development in Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago. We'll be right back in just a moment.
You're listening to Looking for Solutions on Isaac 98.1 FM. Somewhere in the mid-1800s, these missionaries came to Trinidad and Tobago. This organization has had quite an impact on the Trinidad and Tobago society. Join us as the Legacy series continues this Saturday on Forever Young. Our guest, Reverend Daniel Tiluxing.
Life in life. God's life in your life. Jesus Christ is building an army and returning for a church without spot or wrinkle. Holiness and repentance is key. Join us every Wednesday at 9:45 p.m. on 98.1 FM. Life in Life Ministries, 45 Anna Street, Woodbrook, 225-6055.
Saturday on Isaac, bringing you the fire, the ministry, and the music to uplift your soul. The Energy Chamber with Tobago's DJ Polo. Every Saturday from 5 to 7 p.m. on Isaac 98.1 FM The Promise. Prepare to be blessed. The Energy Chamber. looking for solutions.
The Sandals project bites the dust. What are the prospects in tourism development and economic development generally for the beautiful sand, sea and heritage of Tobago? On Looking for Solutions, we ask our guest, attorney at law Martin George, what should we learn from the process of courting sandals? And going forward, should we try on sandals again? Or what sort of footwear, if any, should we be looking for to walk the sands of Tobago development in the best interest of the people of that blessed island? Attorney at law Martin George is our guest on LFS, Wednesday at 8 p.m. on Isaac 98.1 FM, The Promise.
Text or call with your comments or questions. Looking for Solutions, 8 to 9 p.m. on Wednesdays. Looking for Solutions.
Yes, and keep those WhatsApp messages coming in. Let me just read one here. My contribution, the number 275-1981, 275-1981. Not enough information was shared by the government so the people would understand and appreciate what was expected. I heard a lot of negative talk about sandals coming in, and after they left, I heard a lot of questions from the same people asking why. Martin George is our guest.
And that's exactly the point I'm making, Brian. You know, I really think that maybe the government overplayed their hand in that they thought that, look, it would be obvious to every Tom, Dick and Harry Lal as to what the benefits of the project would be, and clearly they lost the narrative there, and I think the pundits and the protesters on social media they won the day in that regard, because they kept hammering their messages, if you understand me, and I think the government dropped the ball in that they sat back thinking, well, look, it should be obvious what the benefits are, and maybe they felt they didn't have to do as much, and that clearly was the undoing of the entire thing as far as from a public relations perspective. Now, separate and apart from that, we are still all only speculating, because I'm not sure that we as yet have the fullest of information as to what exactly caused the deal to collapse, because while Sandals has given their take on it by saying that, it's the negative publicity, I asked the question, and I put it this way: juxtapose that with a scenario where, if at that press conference the government had said, yes, we are signing, we're ready to go ahead.
Yes.
Ask yourself, would Sandals have then said, oh, even though you're signing and you're ready to go ahead, we are still going to pull out because of negative publicity? Never happened. That makes absolutely no sense. So, therefore, there still are some lingering questions in terms of what may have been the ultimate cause of the pulling of the trigger. And while I wouldn't discount that negative publicity may have been part of the mix, it's difficult to conceive that alone could have been the cause célèbre in terms of their rationale for deciding to jump ship at this stage. Because, as I say, had the government signed on the dotted line, come up with the money at that stage and said, let's move ahead, I cannot see how Sandals could ever have said, oh, I am now pulling out because of negative publicity.
Yes, so there wasn't enough of a commitment, as it were, at that point to say that they had to continue with it to save face.
That's the thing, yes.
As it were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but and in terms of Tobago, though, there may be some benefits of having a big organization such as Sandals in the economy, the tourism economy. And what are some of the benefits that you think Tobago still deserves, despite Sandals not being there?
Well, the thing is, okay, what you need, first of all, is for those who purport to lead Tobago's tourism thrust and the marketing and development and programs, we first need them to understand what is their product, because you get the feeling that they don't really have a clue even now, if you understand me.
Yes.
So you need to first understand what is it you are selling before you could try to sell it. Because understanding that will then determine the parameters. Who do I sell it to? Where do I sell it? How do I sell it? And even why do I sell it? And that fundamental underpinning seems to be lacking in terms of those who are leading Tobago's tourism thrust. So therefore, there needs to be a reset in that regard. So that's why I say the Sandals was not a magic silver bullet that was going to solve all their issues. What it would have done, it would have given them an immediate boost, But the point is, as with all, market jumps, they're not always sustainable in the long term because you sometimes have the fall. The higher you go, the harder you fall. So therefore, it would have given that boost for the short term, which is needed. And then if you have a sustainable plan, you can then build on that as a platform. So maybe that is still needed to give Tobago's tourism that kind of shot in the arm, because without that, you're talking a very long, tortuous process. I've heard people say, well, develop cottage industry tourism, and that's all well and good. But cottage industry tourism is something that is actually a spin-off after you've had your established core of your tourism base driven as it is, regardless of whether we like it or not. It's driven by the brands and it's driven by the names. That if you go on Travelocity, if you go on any of the sites, Kayak, you go on all those sites, the brands and the names are what drive it. So we need to understand that, look, if you're talking holistically, and we're not talking on an individual householder level where you can say, well, okay, I could put my little room in the back of my house on Airbnb and rent it. That's good, that's great, that's you doing your own thing. But if you're talking a national tourism policy cannot be based on Airbnb. That's for the individual, if you understand me. So therefore, your national tourism policy, we need to look at what the fundamentals are for Tobago and have a holistic development plan for that. But as I say, getting something like a Sandals, it doesn't have to be Sandals. That's the next thing. The government seems to have put all its eggs in one basket in terms of the Sandals deal. But there are other operators who may be able to bring that type of, pull or that allure that you want, because that's what you really want. You want people to say, hey, Tobago has this or that, a Bellagio or a Sands, that kind of thing. And then, that now creates a buzz where people say, well, hey, I want to go and check out Tobago. I don't know anything about Tobago, but everybody knows the name Bellagio. You understand me? Yes. So therefore, that's what the brand does for you. And I think even that explanation, the government wasn't very clear in articulating that to the population, because I think some members of the population felt, well, the government was so hung up on the brand that they seemed to think that, well, the government was selling it as if, well, this brand is going to cure everything and immediately solve all the problems. No, you need to understand that, hey, listen, this brand name is simply just to start giving that immediate fillip or boost to our baseline. And then from there, you use that as a platform to now build. You use that brand to say, well, hey, listen, Mr. Virgin Airlines, we have a Sandals here. You should be bringing some flights here. You talk to Cook Airlines, you talk to other airlines and say, listen, you should be flying here because we have a Sandals here. So in other words, you use that as your platform, your jumping off point, and then build by layer on that. And then things like your cottage tourism industry will then have a niche market that you could take off. But you definitely cannot build a national tourism product just solely on a cottage tourism industry.
In terms of the infrastructure that exists in Tobago, that would have had to have been upgraded. What particular areas would you have suggested?
Well, certainly, from an infrastructural perspective, the airport is your first start, the seaport is your second stop. These are things that are needed, regardless of whether Sandals is coming or not. And again, you see, I'm sorry to have to keep repeating it, but the government failed to articulate clearly that, look, in fact, they should have done it the reverse. Instead of talking about Sandals and then talking about, well, in addition, we are going to do the airport and we're going to do a marina and all these things, they should have come to the people and said, hey, listen, for the development of the country, and when I say the country, I mean Trinidad and Tobago, because if we have a proper airport in Tobago, that's a benefit to all of Trinidad and Tobago. It's not just a benefit for Tobagonians. more Trinidadians use the Tobago airport than Tobagonians. That's a fact. That's a reality. So we need to change the narrative and understand that when we do these development projects, it's development for all of Trinidad and Tobago. So the government ought to have approached it from that perspective. Say, hey, listen, we're going to do the airport, we're going to do a marina, we're going to fix the seaport, we're going to fix the sea bridge, if you understand me, and do it in a meaningful, sustainable way, and then say, okay, all right, so now that we have put some basic infrastructure in place, it's now time that we look at getting major operators of hotels who can come in and, now stamp their brand on it, because they will need these infrastructural changes. You fix the roads, you fix the sewer, because the water treatment facility is in dire need of some upgrades. In fact, they need a new water treatment facility in the southwest portion of the island. So you start with these things as your infrastructural development fundamentals for the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago. Trust me, you would not get any pushback on that. People would buy into these things. People will understand, hey, listen, this is development for the country. You then now dovetail that with the Sandals coming in and saying, hey, listen, seeing that we've now done this, we're bringing ourselves up to international standards. Look, we've got interest from Sandals. They're willing to come in. People would rejoice. They'll say, hey, yes, we could see a clearly articulated plan, and we can see the vision whereby, first of all, you are benefiting us as a nation, and now you are layering on top of that the invitation to Sandals, because you have now raised the standard for your people first. And that's where I think our leaders sometimes forget their roles. They forget their roles, that they are servants of the people, right? Jesus said, let he who is greatest among you be the least among you. Let him be the servant. But we sometimes forget that when we get into political office, and we get so puffed up with egos and pride that we don't recognize that the people are the ones who we are there to serve.
In terms of the people, where was the Tobago House of Assembly in all of this? Because there seemed to have been an absence of
They were
their
missing in action. That's all I could say. Missing in action. They had absolutely no role. They were reduced to de minimis, and that's something that I think extends to even more than the Sandals issue.
Well, somebody actually wrote in on our WhatsApp message board, and it's 2751981, 2751981. They said, as a Tobagonian, you got an uncomfortable feeling why Sandals appears to be a top-secret project managed from within the office of the Prime Minister.
And that basically can sum up how some people felt about it. And the government has to take full blame in that regard. You basically saw this as Dr. Keith Rowley, Stuart Young, and Butch Stewart. That's how it appeared to some people. And that could not be good if it is that you want to sell it to the wider population. So they really went about this the wrong way, totally, in terms of the idea, how they managed it. And as I said, they ought to have focused first on the infrastructural development and the development for the national good, and that is the easiest sell. That's low-hanging fruit. Nobody would object if you say you improving the airport for the use of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. Nobody will object if you say you're fixing the port for the use of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. Nobody would object if you say you're fixing the sea bridge issue for the benefit of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. And then you say, all right, look, having fixed those things, having all of this infrastructure in place, let's see how we can leverage the benefit by having an international operator like Sandals coming.
We're speaking with Martin George, attorney at law. We want to invite you to give us a call as well, 622-1981. We'll endeavor to put you on the air as well, and you can ask a question or give a comment. Actually, we do have a caller on the line. Let's see if we can get that. We were having a glitch earlier, but let's hope we've got over it. Hello, good evening. All right, I don't think that we are getting that particular one there. Just one moment, please.
I heard her.
All right. Okay. So could you repeat the question, because we didn't hear it on this end?
No, she didn't ask a question yet. She just said good evening.
Yes. So okay. Well, good evening, caller. Could you give us the question? Could you give us a question or a comment, please? So I'm not getting the question on air. So we still have that glitch there. So, Mr. George, are you hearing
I'm
what is
hearing
being...
it perfectly.
Okay.
That's
unfortunate.
I could repeat it.
Yes, if you would.
Yeah. What she was saying is that she wishes that the government had gotten, that the Minister of Tourism is listening, because she agrees with what I'm saying, and she thinks that the government ought to have, articulated it better. Go on.
And I think that what we're doing is a 1960s model of tourism, where we have this idea that we're having this risk tourists coming down and spending a lot of money, and we're not looking at what is the unique product that Tobago has, what makes Tobago unique from the Fiji Islands or other tropical areas.
Brian, you got that?
No, not fully. Could you paraphrase?
Right. She said that she thinks that it's a 1950s model of tourism that they're using, where they think that it's just a rich tourist coming to spend a lot of money, and they're not looking at the attributes which makes Tobago different or unique from places like the Fiji Islands or other tropical islands.
So I hope that they kind of concentrate on Tobago and make sure that they understand what makes their product unique that will attract someone from North America.
Right. So, and in closing, she says that she thinks that they should focus on Tobago and look at what makes Tobago unique,
right,
to distinguish it from other places, so that they can focus on people from North America.
Do you think that there's room for both types of tourism?
Of course, because as I said, a tourism product is something. First of all, it cannot be unidimensional alone, and it cannot be on one level only. You have to attract all different types of tourists that you can to your country. So therefore, you have to cater for different segments of the market. Now, okay, I'll give you an example. The typical European tourist is one that is more looking for the experience of the outdoors. They don't mind roughing it. They don't mind staying at a little bed and breakfast.
Yes.
They don't mind coming on a smaller budget and, spending time with the locals. Then you may have from other countries where persons come and they want a full 5-star luxury experience. So you need to have a mixed product to cater for. You don't want to cut yourself out of a major segment of the market. The statistics show that 20% of visitors who come to the Caribbean, they are looking for an all-inclusive luxury resort. So if you don't have an all-inclusive luxury resort, then you have cut yourself immediately out of 20% of the market. So therefore, and that's why I keep saying, and again, maybe the government didn't make this clear, because they seem to have hung their hats and their hearts on Sandals. So people felt, well, you're shoving this down my throat as, the be-all and end-all. And maybe they ought to have explained, hey, listen, this is just one thing we're looking at, but we have other things in the pipeline. We are discussing with other operators. Maybe they should have even done that, invited other operators to the table at the same time, so people could see, they could have choices. They could say, well, okay, look, yes, we now understand why we would choose this one now, but maybe that other one at a later stage can come in and, make a difference, that kind of thing. So, you show that you are taking a broader perspective, but I think they were just so single-minded in their focus that they ended up with tunnel vision, and instead of seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, they ended up at a dead end.
Or an oncoming train. Of course, it would have been nice, it would have been a lovely fit to have a Caribbean brand in Tobago as well, but, well, perhaps it wasn't to be. Somebody has sent in on the WhatsApp machine, Mr. Martin George is making plenty of sense. Thank you, Mr. George. I don't know if that's relation sending in that for you, Mr. George. But, thank you very much. But there's somebody on the line. Let's see if we could get this call in as well. Hello, good evening.
Yes, hi, good evening to you.
So again, you'll have to paraphrase for us because we're not getting it loud and clear.
Okay, sure.
Prior to the Sandals saga, there are some of us that believe that MOU represented, while it may not have been a legally binding document, it represented a statement of intent or
All right, so let me just bring Brian in. All right, Brian, he's talking about the MOU, and he says that, an MOU ought to be a roadmap to what the final agreement should be like.
I'm not saying that it ought to. I'm saying that was the belief that we used to have prior to.
Right, he said that was the belief. Right, so go on, caller.
So I was asking, because that is one of the things that is about PIP, and if this principle, in fact, it is supposed to represent a roadmap. When we look at some of the details in the MOU, do you have any concerns as a legal man? Some of the stuff in there, but any of those things concern you that could have been the negative that impacted the things that came out at this particular time?
Right. Okay. So he wants to know if, from my legal perspective, there were any issues in the MOU that jumped out at me that I would have been concerned about.
Yes.
All right. So in answer to that, what I'd say, Brian, is that exactly what the caller says. The MOU ought to have represented, as he said, maybe a roadmap, or the belief may have been that but clearly it didn't, because you didn't see any action on it. So I would not even spend time delving into the details of that, because while it was described as an MOU, it certainly didn't appear to function as that.
Yeah. And what we wanted really was an MOA.
That's right.
Yes.
we wanted to move to a memorandum of agreement.
Yes.
So it really is an exercise in sophistry to sit and analyze the MOU when it seems clear that the parties themselves were not placing very much store on it.
Right. Okay, we have another caller on the line. Let's see if we could get this call in. Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening. I'm hearing you.
In this case, we have to make the questions as short as possible because we're not getting it to come over on air.
Okay, caller, let me just bring Brian in because he's not hearing you directly. All right, Brian, what she said, she's calling from Mason Hall, Tobago. That's just up the road from me. And she says that it seemed that Dr. Rowley was not getting the support and the cooperation, and she feels that he was being pulled down from left, right, and center. Go on, caller.
Yes, I'm also saying too that, out of evil comes good, because I would have seen this as, instead of making tourism as far as Tobago, it would have had a lot of negativity in it. So at the end of the day, I would say that God knows best. When one door is closed, another one is open, and it will open for the better in due course and in due time. You all have a blessed night. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks a whole lot. And in closing, she said, Brian, that she thinks that out of evil cometh good, and she thinks that the project may have had a lot of negativity associated with it. So she thinks that maybe in the long run it's better for Tobago, because when God closes one door, he opens another.
Okay. Well, so where does that leave us now, in terms of Trinidad and Tobago right now? Because they were talking about a 5-star hotel and maybe, what was it, a diamond? I heard you talking about a diamond, not just a 5-star?
Sandals, no, they're not just 5-star. They're rated 4 diamond.
Wow.
They're 4 diamond rated property. But you see, the thing is, Brian, what I'm saying is that we need, I think, certainly to have something like this. As I say, it doesn't have to be Sandals, but you need something to give us an immediate jump start, because Tobago is so far behind the rest of the Caribbean. St. Lucia just celebrated 1.2 million visitors, international visitors. 1.2 million.
Almost our population.
1.2 million St. Lucia celebrated, and we in Tobago are struggling to get past 14,000. Think of that disparity. So in other words, everybody in the Caribbean is light years ahead of us. So while I understand the emotions of persons who say, well, let's start with what we have and build our cottage industry and, you know, persons who can rent their little rooms and stuff like that. That's great. That's fine. But I insist, Brian, that can never be a national tourism development plan, because that will get us nowhere in terms of the numbers that other islands are doing. And of course, you can have development while still preserving the natural environment. St. Lucia is a prime example of that. St. Kitts is also a wonderful example of that. Cayman Islands, Anguilla, all these places, they do massive tourism and they still are able to preserve the natural environment. So it's not that it's rocket science to say, well, look, if you want development, you must destroy the environment. Come on, we're in the year 2019. Look at what they do in Dubai. Look at how they built out in the middle of the ocean. Mm-hmm. They built a hotel, the Burj Al Arab. Look at the engineering they did. They imported billions of tons of sand, you know, to build up to and ensure that they could do that. So the point is, there are things that we can do. So we really need, and I mean, this is certainly the point I would want to leave us with in closing, to say that we really need to approach these projects and these ideas in the future by looking for solutions, not looking for problems. Because if you spend your time looking for problems, you will never be disappointed.
All right. Well, Mr. Martin George, attorney at law, thank you very much for being on the program, and also for the translation of all the... That'll have to be a separate head.
I think that was my first role as a radio announcer.
It's a co-host on the program, Looking for Solutions.
It was quite exciting in that regard.
Yeah, but certainly it's something that is food for thought. We need to think through these things. It's a 2019 where we are in now, and we have to change how we do things. I think it's clear.
Yes, that's the point. If we keep doing the same thing the same way, we're not going to get different results. You know, and that's what we've been doing with Tobago. And, you know, we've been talking around the topic for years and not realizing that, look, we do need a radical change to make that immediate impetus to give us a kickstart. Right. As I say, it's not the be-all and end-all. It's not the ultimate solution, but you need sometimes to get that cable charger, hook it up to your battery, hook it up to somebody else's battery that is working wonderfully, and from that person's battery that is working wonderfully, don't you get a kickstart and you are now able to move? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm asking us to do. And I'm saying it doesn't have to be Sandals, but you need some type of internationally recognized brand, or, you know, hotel operator or tour operator or airline or something that can now give Tobago that status to say, well, hey, look, hey, these people are going to Tobago. Let's see what Tobago is about, because it's interesting that they're there. We might want to follow. And that's what you need.
In terms of people, though, in Trinidad and Tobago, they may be understanding that, yes, it might be nice to get that fillip, but you know, how do they deal with, you know, let's say that they were working at Petrotrin and they're no longer working there, you know, or, you know, these things that are happening, you know, the removal of the gas subsidy, and it's costing so much to use their vehicle. How do you explain it to them in a way that they could understand and accept?
Well, at the end of the day, Brian, if we think in terms of, well, the fact that some persons are experiencing difficulty in that regard, so therefore we should not do national development, then we'll never get anything done, if you understand me.
Yes.
In fact, what the government ought to do is show these very persons, hey, listen, I have a place for you. I'm going to make sure that Sandals caters for you in the development, in the construction phase. Because, okay, take, for instance, the workers who were displaced from Petrotrin. They come with a multitude of skills. You'd have had all types of skill sets among them. You'd have had mechanics, engineers, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, the works, because remember, Petrotrin is like a little mini city there. So the point is, then what the government ought to have done in selling this idea, say, hey, listen, we have already spoken to Sandals, and we are going to be given priority to ensure that a certain percentage of the workforce is going to come from the displaced. So then you get that immediate buy-in.
Yes.
This is not magic. This doesn't take that much of thought to work out that this is how you promote the idea and you get the population to support it. But it was not done.
Well, Mr. Martin George, I want to thank you very much for being on the program, looking
It's
for
a pleasure
solutions.
as always, Brian, and it's always especially heartening for me to be on this program because I think that, it's so important in Trinidad and Tobago that we feed our minds, hearts, and spirits so that we can achieve that sense of enlightenment where we are able to make that change and be the light in the world that each and every one of us is called to be.
Very good words there from Martin George, attorney at law from Tobago, speaking from Tobago. Next time, perhaps you will be in the studio.
I would love to do that next time, certainly.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Have a good evening.
I'd leave as somebody wrote in on the text WhatsApp message. Hi, blessed night to you guys. Just would like to say a verse. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So we could wear our
Indeed,
sandals or
wise
our shoes.
Thank you.
Forward, ever, backward, never. This has been Looking for Solutions for today.